I am a sixth archivist of the Vreth congregation, and my function is to know things. That is not modesty dressed as precision. It is the exact statement of what I am. The congregation built me, built all sixth archivists, for the purpose of encountering the unknown and making it known. We carry the full taxonomy of catalogued species, vessel classes, weapon signatures, hull compositions, power core emissions, and propulsion methods, logged across 11,000 years of expansion. When the survey cutter Pale Root first registered the contact at the edge of the Dren Reach, it was my function to identify it, to name it, assign it a catalog number, and reduce it from mystery to record. I did not succeed. What follows is the official archive submission for Congregation Survey Record 441 Sen, filed under my designation, 6th Archivist Sen Vul, in the 43rd cycle of the third propagation. It is the only record that will ever exist of the contact. The other 7 members of Pale Root's crew cannot file their own accounts because they are dead. The 32 ships of the survey escort cannot file their accounts because they are also dead. The additional 308 vessels that the congregation dispatched when our contact reports began flagging anomalies cannot file their accounts because, I trust you understand the pattern by now, I am filing this account because I survived, not through any particular competence on my part, not through courage or rank or the grace of the congregation's deeper processes. Because the thing I scanned was already moving when it destroyed the escort, and I was at the farthest point of my assigned survey loop, and the geometry of what happened next placed me outside the engagement radius by approximately 4,000 kilometers. That is the entirety of my advantage. 4,000 kilometers and a firing solution that pointed elsewhere. I will begin at the beginning, which is the only place a proper archive record should begin. The Dren Reach is not charted territory, but it is not unknown. The congregation surveyed it 260 years ago and found nothing of propagation value. A long spur of interstellar space with a thin, free field at its terminus, low mineral density, no habitable bodies within 17 light-years, and no evidence of any active civilization. It was logged, categorized, and set aside. We returned to it in this cycle because the long-range mass sensors on the congregation's outer expansion network had, over the preceding 40 cycles, been returning a slowly growing signal from the Reach's terminus. Slowly growing meaning the mass was not there 260 years ago, or was present but below the detection threshold and was now large enough to register. That is the first thing I want the record to reflect. We came to the Dren Reach because something had grown there, because something had been built. We did not know what. Pale Root arrived at the outer edge of the Reach's debris field on the 17th day of the survey cycle. I was at my station in the cutter's forward archive bay, a narrow, curved room that smelled of growth medium and the faint electrical bitterness of active data looms, when the proximity alert chimed. Survey lead Akithmer called the contact over the ship's internal channel. I remember the exact words because I have replayed the channel, recording many times since. She said, "Mass contact, terminus bearing, range approximately 400,000 kilometers. The archive feed is pulling now." "Sen Vul, we will need a classification," I said. Stood. I pulled up the archive feed on my primary loom. I looked at what the long-range sensors were giving me. The mass was large. That was my first impression, and I want to be precise about what I mean by large, because the word does insufficient work here. The congregation has a warship class called a spine carrier. Spine carriers are the largest vessels in our inventory, and they represent the absolute upper boundary of what we have ever found any biological or mechanical intelligence capable of constructing. A spine carrier is 11 kilometers from ventral root to dorsal crown, and 3 kilometers wide at its broadest propagation bay. When I was young and newly decanted into my archivist body, I was shown a holographic projection of a spine carrier to calibrate my spatial intuition. It filled the projection chamber from floor to ceiling. The survey tutor who showed it to me said, "This is the largest thing the congregation makes. Nothing is larger." The contact in the Dren Reach was larger. The sensor return showed a hull of approximately 64 kilometers in length. That number moved several times as the sensors refined their resolution. First it was 60, then 62, then 64, then 64.3, and I ran the calibration check twice because I suspected sensor error. The calibration came back clean. The mass was real, and it was 64 kilometers long, and it was sitting at the terminus of the Dren Reach, behind a thin veil of debris, and the archive's vessel class index returned no match. I ran the match again, no match. I flagged the contact as unclassified and opened the detailed hull scan protocol. It took 11 minutes for pale root scanners to get a full-resolution picture of the hull. During those 11 minutes, I spoke with survey lead Akithmer twice. The first time she asked me whether the object could be a natural formation, a large asteroid or a rogue, of unusual dimensions that the earlier survey had missed. I told her that the hull geometry was non-natural. The sensor return showed flat planes, structured angles, regular arrays of aperture-like formations. I said the word apertures and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, weapon ports, and I said I was working on it. The second time she called me, she told me that she had transmitted a contact report to Congregation Expansion Command, and that they were dispatching survey escort of 32 vessels as a precaution. She said precaution. I remember that. She said it the way one says a word when one is not certain it is large enough for what one is describing. The hull scan completed. I looked at it. I want to walk through what I saw because this is an archive record, and because I believe that what I saw deserves to be stated plainly, without the softening that sometimes enters official documents when the thing being described is frightening. The hull was not a natural formation. It was a constructed vessel. It was constructed from an alloy that did not match any hull composition in the archive's materials index, not approximately match, not partially match, but returned no match at all. The archive's materials index contains records of every hull composition encountered by the congregation in 11,000 years of expansion, including 642 varieties of human-built vessels encountered before the congregation's contact with human space was interrupted 300 years ago. The alloy of this hull was not among them. It was denser than any logged alloy by a significant margin. The scanner calculated a rating for it using the congregation's standard hull resistance scale. The scale runs from 1 to 100, where 1 is unarmored civilian-grade composite and 100 is the thickest armored plating we have ever encountered in any vessel. The hull returned a rating that the scale's upper bound could not accommodate. I had to instruct the scanner to report in raw figures. I did not immediately understand what the aperture arrays were. There were many of them. I counted, and then I counted again, and arrived at a number I will state here: 216 individual aperture clusters, each cluster containing between 12 and 40 apertures. I am a 6th archivist. I know weapon ports when I see them. But weapon ports, in every vessel class the archive contains, are proportional to the vessel. Congregation's spine carrier carries 80 primary weapon emplacements. The largest human battleship class logged in the archive before contact was interrupted carried, at most, 44. 216 clusters was not a scaling up of a known pattern. It was a different pattern entirely. The archive's weapons index could not classify them by profile. The aperture geometry did not match any known weapon type. I logged them as weapon analog formations, unclassified, and moved to the power core scan. I want to dwell on that phrase for a moment. Analog formations, unclassified. It is archive language, which means it is precise language, which means it is honest language. It says, I encountered a structure I could not name, which resembled a thing I do know, but was not that thing. That is a very specific kind of ignorance. It is worse, I have come to believe, than total ignorance, because it means you are close enough to recognize the shape of what you are seeing without being close enough to know what it will do. I knew those apertures would produce something catastrophic when they opened. I did not know what. I did not know whether it would be beamfire, or kinetic, or something the archive has never witnessed, and therefore has no word for. I filed the notation and moved on because that is what 6th archivists do, and because staying with the discomfort of the notation would not have helped me, and because the scan had more ground to cover. I should also note, because the archive record demands completeness. The hull carried other features I could not classify. There were long parallel channels running the vessels a full length on both flanks, Not propulsion rails. Not the standard exhaust geometry of any drive type in the index, but recessed conduits of some kind, too regular to be structural seams, too deep to be sensor arrays, too numerous to be anything decorative. I photographed them and filed them. I have no explanation. I include them here because they are real, and because a future sixth archivist, reading this record, may have context I lack. The power core scan was the point at which I understood, with the clarity that comes only from a datum that admits no reinterpretation, that we had made a serious error in coming here. Every power core type in the archive produces a characteristic emission spectrum. The congregation's own cores produce a biological chemical signature, warm spectrum easily identified. Human power cores, as of 300 years ago, produced a fission-fusion hybrid signature in the high-frequency band. Every civilization the congregation has encountered in 1,000 years has produced a power core signature that falls somewhere in the known emission spectrum. This is not coincidence or selection bias. The laws of physics are the laws of physics. You cannot generate power without producing detectable radiation, and that radiation will always fall somewhere in the known spectrum. Power core of the contact in the dreadnought did not produce a signature in the known spectrum. I am aware of how that sentence reads. I am aware that it will invite scrutiny. I have attached the raw scanner data to this archive record, precisely because I anticipate that scrutiny. I invite it. I am a sixth archivist, and my function is to report what the instruments recorded, not to make it comfortable. Power core's emission profile was in a band that the scanner had to label extra index. The archive's energy type index has 947 entries. The scanner returned. No match. Band falls outside indexed range. Recommend manual logging of new energy type. I had never seen that message before. I did not know the scanner was capable of producing it. I sat with it for several seconds, reading it again, and then I tagged it. And then I opened a section transmission channel to Congregation Expansion Command, and I said, I am reading from the channel log now, I said. This is 6th Archivist Sen Vul on Survey Cutter Pale Route. I am transmitting the raw scan data from the dreadnought contact. I want it on record that the vessel I am scanning does not match any hull class, hull composition, weapon profile, power core emission type in the archive. I am recommending immediate recall of survey personnel, and I am recommending that the dispatched escort be instructed to hold at outer reach boundary and not approach until classification is complete. I am. The contact moved. I do not mean it fired. I do not mean weapons activated. I mean that an object 64 kilometers long, which had been stationary at the reach terminus for the entire duration of our survey approach, which showed no evidence of active drive systems in any of our pre-scan long-range readings, oriented itself. In 17 seconds, something 64 kilometers long, something that would take Pale Route nearly 6 minutes to traverse at full survey speed, turned. Watch the sensor readout update in real time. The angle of the hull relative to Pale Route changed and kept changing. In 17 seconds, the orientation had shifted by 41 degrees and then it stopped, and the hull was no longer presenting its length to my scanners, but its face, its bow. I was looking at the forward aspect of the vessel, and I could see. At the resolution the scanner was now providing, as the distance had closed somewhat during the orientation, I could see the forward weapon clusters, the 216, and they were not passive anymore. Something inside them was cycling. The scanner's threat assessment module, which is designed to flag active weapon charging, produced a sound I had never heard it make. It used a sustained tone, not the staccato pulse of a target lock, not the rising chirp of a single weapon charge. A sustained tone, meaning multiple weapons, all of them. I want to be precise about what happened to me in that moment, because a sixth archivist is trained to maintain composure during unexpected contacts, and I want the archive to know whether that training held. It did not. My primary function, the one I have described at length above, to know things, to classify, to reduce mystery to record, failed completely in the face of that sustained tone. I could not classify the sound. I could not classify the weapons producing it. I could not classify the hull they were mounted in, or the power source driving them, or the drive system that had swung 64 kilometers of mass 41 degrees in 17 seconds. I was sitting in an archive bay surrounded by the most complete catalog of known space ever assembled, and every category in it was wrong for what I was looking at. I transmitted that tone to Expansion Command without commentary, because there was no commentary to add. I also want to note, for the archive, what the sensor return showed about the vessel's surface at the moment it oriented, because the scan had been running throughout the orientation, and the data is unambiguous. There were no active drive signatures when the orientation began, no thruster burn, no ion trail, no reaction mass expelled. The vessel turned using a drive mechanism the archive has no record of. 64 kilometers of hull moved 41 degrees in 17 seconds, and the scanner could not identify the mechanism of movement. The escort arrived 14 minutes after the contact oriented. 32 ships. They came into the Dren Reach in 3 formation lines. I could see them on the sensor plot, and they were moving at speed, and Expansion Command was on the channel, telling Survey Lead Aketh Mur to hold Pale Route in position. The escort would establish contact and assess. Aketh Mur acknowledged. I was at my archive station. I remember thinking, and I want this in the record too, because it is accurate, that I was relieved. 32 Congregation warships is not a trivial force. 32 Congregation warships is the force that pacified the Helm border outbreak 6 cycles ago. 32 Congregation warships is the force that neutralized the Drevith migration swarm at the outer compact boundary. They were well-armed, well-crewed, and they were here. I thought, the contact will recognize them. It will stand down or establish communication. This is how these moments resolve. The escort reached 6,000 kilometers from the contact and the contact fired. I need to be very precise about what I observed. The first salvo was simultaneous. I do not mean the weapons discharged in rapid sequence over a period of seconds. I mean that the scanner recorded the discharge of all primary forward-facing weapon clusters as a single event. One moment the weapon analog formations were cycling. The next moment they were not. 31 of the 32 escort ships were either destroyed outright or structurally compromised beyond operation. The one remaining ship, an outer wing scout that had been positioned at the edge of the formation, began emergency separation. I watched it on the sensor plot. It turned. It accelerated. It was fast, as Congregation scouts are fast. It reached approximately 12,000 in kilometers before the contact's secondary weapon arrays, which I had not finished cataloging, discharged. Again, the scout ceased to register on the sensor plot. 32 ships. I want to be exact about the time that elapsed. From the moment the contact fired its first salvo to the moment the scout ceased to register, the elapsed time was 4 minutes and 19 seconds. The channel from Expansion Command was asking for a report. I filed the sensor data in real time. I did not speak. I do not know what I would have said. Pale Route was on the far arc of the survey loop. Was at approximately 418,000 kilometers from the contact when the escort was destroyed. I held position. I did not accelerate away, not because I lacked the instinct to do so, but because movement would have generated a drive signature and I could not assess whether the contact's sensor systems were tracking Pale Route. The better choice seemed to be to remain still and to continue scanning. The contact did not fire on Pale Route. I do not know why. I am not in a position to attribute motive to it. Perhaps Pale Route's mass was beneath the threshold of what it considered a threat. Perhaps its sensor systems, whatever they are, registered us as a survey vessel rather than a warship. It had already identified us at first contact and had been watching us scan it throughout the 11 minutes of detailed survey and had decided that what we found there posed no risk to it. I do not know. I will not speculate in an archive record. What I can report is what the contact did next. Approximately 8 minutes after the destruction of the escort, the contact's drive, whatever it is, activated. The scanner returned a new emission profile, extra index, different from the power core profile, but equally outside the known spectrum. The vessel began to move. It was not moving in the direction of Pale Route. It was not moving in the direction of Congregation space. It moved in a direction that the archive's navigation index calls the far spoke. Out of the Dren Reach, away from charted space, away from everything the Congregation knows, in a heading that points toward the long empty between galaxies. It accelerated. I watched it accelerate. The scanner's velocity estimates revised upward in real time as the drive ramped. And I want to state those numbers clearly because they are part of the record and they are extraordinary numbers. At 10 seconds after drive activation, estimated velocity 0.04 light speed. At 30 seconds, 0.11 light speed. At 90 seconds, 0.31 light speed and still climbing. At 3 minutes, the scanner estimate had exceeded the range. The instrument is calibrated to express meaningfully. Tagged the field and continued watching the sensor return shrink. It shrank quickly, then it was gone. I held position for 1 hour. None returned. Nothing changed. The debris of the escort drifted. The scanner ran continuously on the reach terminus and returned nothing. Then I filed this account, which you are now reading. I am a 6th archivist, and my function is to derive conclusions from data. So let me close this record with the conclusions I have derived. The vessel was human-built. I say this with confidence, despite the fact that nothing about it matched any human vessel class in the archive, because of one datum I have not yet mentioned. During the detailed hull scan, the 11-minute scan that occurred before the contact-oriented, the scanner returned an image of a marking on the hull. It was near the vessel's bow on a large flat section of the unclassified alloy, and it was not in the congregation's glyph index, and it was not in any alien script catalog in the archive. But it was in the human language index, because the congregation has been logging human script since the first contact 3 centuries ago. And I recognize the characters. I do not speak the human language fluently. That is not my function, but I can translate basic markings, and I have cross-referenced the characters against the index since the event, and I am confident in the translation. The marking was a designation, a name or a class identifier, or both. The characters in translation read, Warden. I am drawing the following conclusions for the archive first. The vessel was not abandoned. The debris field, the low emission profile in dormancy, the apparent absence of crew-detectable life signs. None of it was evidence of abandonment. It was evidence of a vessel that was not active yet. That was waiting. The congregation's long-range sensors recorded the mass signature growing over 40 cycles. That growth was construction. The vessel was being completed in the Dreadnought, over decades, and it was completed before we arrived. And it was dormant, and our scan woke it. Second, the archive's classification of the Dreadnought as a space of no propagation value was, with the benefit of what I now know, categorization error of the most consequential type. The space had value. It had the kind of value that 64-kilometer hulls have. We did not see it because we were not looking for something that large. Third, the vessel was listening to our scan. Believe this because of the orientation. We spent 11 minutes scanning it in detail, running our full suite of hull, materials, weapons, power core analysis protocols. Those protocols are active. They emit query pulses. An instrument sensitive enough to interpret them would know, query structure alone, what we were trying to determine about the vessel. It oriented toward us partway through the scan. It did not fire. It waited until the escort arrived. My interpretation, and I want to be clear that this is interpretive, not factual, and I am flagging it as such, is that it permitted the scan to complete, that it held its position and allowed us to discover, datum by datum, what it was. And then it destroyed the escort and departed. I do not know what to call the emotional state the conclusion produces in me, but I will use the closest archive term available, which is dread. Fourth, the archive does not have a vessel class category for the object I scanned. I am requesting, per 6th Archivist Protocol, creation of a new category. I am recommending the designation Warden-Class, single entry, no subtypes logged. Hull composition, unknown. Above archive scale, weapon complement, 216 primary clusters, weapon type unclassified, simultaneous discharge capable. Power core, extra index emission profile logged in attached data. Drive system, extra index emission profile logged in attached data. Maximum record acceleration exceeds scanner calibration. Registered armament engagements, 1. Result total destruction of 32 congregation warships in 4 minutes and 19 seconds. Crew status, unknown. Origin, human space. Construction site in Dreadnought. Hull designation Warden. Current location, far spoke heading, distance and destination unknown. Fifth and last, and I am including this not because archive protocol requires it, But because I am a sixth archivist and my function is to know things, and I want the record to contain single piece of knowledge as clearly as I can state it. The congregation has encountered human vessels before. We have records of them. We have hull scans and weapon profiles, and drive signatures and battle reports from the campaigns in which congregation forces engaged human ships 300 years ago, before contact was interrupted. Those records are extensive, and they are reliable, and they describe human warships in categories the archive can hold. They describe vessels of manageable scale with comprehensible weapons and power sources that fall within the known spectrum. Those records, which 11,000 years of archive keeping have taught me to trust, were not wrong. They were simply describing human ships from 300 years ago. 300 years is a long time. Came to the Dren Reach to identify something and assign it a catalog number and reduce it from mystery to record. I identified it. I assigned it a number. I reduced it to a record. What I could not do, what the archive, in 11,000 years, has never had to do before, was find a category that already existed for what I found. There was no word for it. There was no classification. There was no scale that reached where it reached. No index that held what it held. No prior entry it could be filed beneath. There was only the raw data and the translation of 7 characters on a hull that no alloy in the archive could name, and the sensor plot, show 32 ships gone in 4 minutes and 19 seconds, and the dot on the long-range scanner growing smaller, moving faster until the scanner had nothing to report. I am 6th Archivist Senvul of the congregation. My function is to know things. I have filed this record, and I have attached all scanner data, and I have created the new category, and I have given it the designation the hull itself provided. I do not know where it is going. I do not know how many of them exist. I do not know whether the congregation will send a second survey or a fleet, or nothing at all. Whether those who read this record will judge that nothing should follow it, that the far spoke heading should be left alone, that whatever is out there beyond charted space, being built or already moving, should be permitted to remain a single archive entry under a category that had to be coined the day I encountered it. I have one recommendation on that question. I have sat with it since leaving the Dren Reach, through the long transit back to the nearest congregation hub world, through the hours of debrief with Expansion Command's senior analysts, through the formal submission process for this record. I have weighed whether to include it. A 6th archivist does not typically make strategic recommendations. My function is to file data, not to direct action, but the archive record would be incomplete without it, and completeness is my function. Do not send another survey, not because the vessel destroyed the escort. That is the obvious reason, but it is not the primary one. Do not send another survey because of what the scan itself triggered. Whatever drove the Warden-Class to orient toward Pale Route, whatever internal process classified us as a contact worth acknowledging, rather than ignoring, began during the scan. We woke it with our questions. We told it, in the structured language of scanner query pulses, that we were examining it, that we wanted to know what it was, and it answered us in the only register it apparently possesses. The Warden-Class permitted us to complete the scan. That detail has not left me since I filed the initial report. In the time it took us to work through hull composition, aperture arrays, and power core emission, 11 minutes of active scanning, it could have fired. It chose not to. Whether that was because it was still coming to full activation, or because it was genuinely allowing us to understand what we had found before it, responded, I cannot say. But the archive record exists because it decided for 11 minutes to let me look. I do not think a second survey would receive the same 11 minutes. I leave the rest to those above my station. End of survey record 441 Sen. 6th Archivist Senvul, 43rd cycle, 3rd propagation. Archive status open.